Welcome to the presentation of our paper Playful Reflection: Impact of Gamification on a Virtual Reality Simulation of Breastfeeding. First off, I'd like to emphasize the focus on reflection in the context of breastfeeding, a very private and sensitive act. So what is reflection? Based on work by Fleck and Fitzpatrick, Ballmer and colleagues, and Bent-Welsen and colleagues, we define reflection as revisiting thoughts that challenge the individual's understanding of a subject, offering an incentive to view the subject from different perspectives and thereby potentially leading to transformative thoughts or behaviors. Prior work by Tang and colleagues investigated VR as a tool to communicate the lived experience of early-stage breastfeeding. The study suggested that participants reflected on challenges as well as rewarding aspects of breastfeeding through the simulated experience. However, participants wished for more game and game-like elements in the simulation. Here we wondered whether gamification might be a viable solution. Based on work by Ditterding, Hamari and colleagues, and Hicks and colleagues, we compiled the strategy to apply gamification through elements that indicate performance in progress and further utilize juicy design. All in all, this led to two research questions. First, we wanted to investigate whether there is a trade-off between player experience and reflection when introducing gamification in the breastfeeding simulation. And second, we wondered whether gamification alters the perception that players have of the lived experience of breastfeeding. Now, for a brief look at the simulation itself. Here you can see a short video of the original simulation. The gamified version of the simulation is in essence the same application, just fortified with performance and progress feedback and juicy design elements. We involved various experts from fields related to this project in the design and revision of the gamification elements. The final set of elements includes a progress bar and a score indicator, achievement badges, particle effects, and changes in music and sound effects for different situations in the simulation, a flare effect and vignette to indicate pain, and game statistics at the end of the simulation. We chose a within-subject study design to investigate the differences between the two versions of the simulation. During the study, we collected demographic information, had participants fill in the PXI and NASA TLX, and lastly, asked them custom items relating to reflection, which were then followed up by a semi-structured interview to gain deeper understanding of participants' answers. We included a total of 34 participants in our study. Of these, 19 identified as female and 15 as male. 20 participants were between 18 and 25 years old, 14 were between 26 and 35 years old. Most of our participants grew up in Belgium or China. Circling back to our research questions, we wanted to know whether there was a trade-off between player experience and reflection. Our results on the PXI indicate that player experience improved in the gamified version, especially functional dimensions such as ease of control or clarity of goals. The analysis of our qualitative data also supports this. Looking at the scores on our custom items on reflection and the interview data on reflection, we found mostly a change in focus of reflection, not in the amount of reflection, so to speak. This is in line with work by Meckler and colleagues that gives more detail on this. The emphasis on goals and achievements in the gamified version may be diverting attention from the task, contradicting the lived experience of breastfeeding and in turn reinforcing unrealistic expectations. Our second research question meant to investigate whether there would be an alteration of the perception of the lived experience of breastfeeding. The increased player experience in the gamified version suggests that performance and progress feedback addresses the uncertainty that is inherent to the nursing experience. However, handling this aspect of breastfeeding in this way risks glossing over the challenges experienced by many parents and in turn, again, promoting unrealistic expectations. The qualitative data regarding reflection shows that the gamified version of the simulation may come with an increased sense of satisfaction, but also stress and tension due to the game elements. These emotions stand in the way of experiencing the quietness and intimacy of feeding a child, as some participants' statements suggest. This might mean that gamification only has a surface-level impact, yet it may still endanger the deeper meaning of breastfeeding when used in this way, again echoing the risk of conveying unrealistic expectations. So, how can we deploy gamification in sensitive settings then? Player experience is a complex phenomenon, however, enjoyment is most often considered a desirable effect and often becomes the central aspect. But games that confront players with discomfort don't necessarily deliver a bad player experience. In our case, the original simulation would be considered inferior to the gamified version because of the increased player experience, while the player experience of the original simulation better reflects the lived experience of breastfeeding, being uncertain, not always fun, and not user-friendly. This does not mean that player experience is irrelevant in cases like this, but we would like to encourage researchers and designers to interpret the outcomes in the context of the intended experience, as well as employ additional qualitative measures to gain nuanced insights. Based on our results, we can see that the game elements seem to be successful in teasing out certain challenges of breastfeeding, such as pain and stress, while reinforcing the feeling of being in a game world, a non-serious yet performance-oriented environment. All in all, this sounds like a complete success, since we were able to deliver a gameful experience while improving aspects of player experience. But throughout, the emphasis was placed on rewards, performance, and progress, not on the act of breastfeeding a baby. While both versions of the simulation share the goal of doing exactly that, our results show that the emotional experiences participants had were different in the two versions. The gamefulness stands in contrast to the seriousness of the simulated situation, so the ethics of employing gamification need to be closely considered here. Diverted suggests that gamification should be utilized in support of the good life, but the individual good life may be conflicting with the collective good life. For example, higher rates of breastfeeding are desirable and should be promoted as the good life from a public health perspective. But for some people, breastfeeding might be neither a positive, playful, nor desirable experience. A tension that needs to be recognized and effectively addressed. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact the authors of this paper.